Rabia Williams, and I am very excited to have her here today. Rabia, welcome. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you, Mert? So excited to be here.
I am fine, thank you. So, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rabia, and I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. I'm here based in Brisbane, in Australia, and in our cloud advocacy team for Microsoft 365. It's actually a pretty new team that we formed this year. And in our team, our main focus is reaching out to developers in the community and try and get them up to speed with development, especially in the Microsoft 365 space, and help you, start developing stuff, help you unblock. So maybe we will also be, like a bridge between the product team and, your community, the developer community, help them understand how things work, bring your feedback back to the product team. So we are the bridge that you have between the Microsoft tools, product teams, and your development space.
Okay, great. So, I want to start with the very basic question. What is Microsoft Graph Toolkit?
Yeah, so graph toolkits are something pretty new and exciting. And I'm so happy I'm getting platforms like your platform here, Mert, to talk about them. They are framework agnostic web components that you can plug and play in your applications. And the beauty of these components are that you can basically have your graph service, your graph API calls inside these components ready made for you. So this makes, as a developer, this should excite me because what happens here is, we'll just go to one of my slides here to show you, what they actually are. Like I said, a collection of framework agnostic web components. And when I say framework agnostic, I mean that it doesn't matter what application you're building, as long as it's a web application, a browser-based application, it will work. And you can use Graph within your application with just having those components into it. So your life is made easier because you don't have to worry about the services or making the graph calls. So that's probably the one big thing you have to figure out, especially with the authentication side of things. That's taken care of for you. All you have to do is use their providers and start using these components, and they're ready made. And another good thing about them is they're open source. So these components, I will take you through the playground as well, since you asked, and show you these components. They're open source, so you can go in there, and even if you want one of your scenarios to be met, you can go in there and probably open an issue with us and say, hey, we would love to see this component, that component, etc. So that's another good take on it. And it is for any developers. So like I said, it does not focus just on M365 developers. It's for anyone who is developing web applications. So like I said, it cuts development time. It's flexible in the sense that just because we're giving you ready-made components doesn't mean that you have to use it as is. You can template it as well. You can put custom CSS, custom styling, custom components inside within the component itself. So it's completely up to you. But the good thing is it's already taking care of that data side, the backend side of things for you. And it's open source. So this is the playground. What I will do now is, you can see the playground here, but I will take you directly to the playground as well, just to show you what it looks like. So if you type mdt.dev, you can see all the components there, and you can basically have a play around. This is mock data, by the way. But you can see here, this one agenda component, which I have used in my me experience, is just this one line of code. This one line of code is actually going ahead and calling the API to get all your events. And it is wrapping up in a nice looking UI, in a fabric UI. And you can see here, I don't have anything for CSS. I don't have anything for JavaScript. all your HTML file has is this, and this is one of the components. So you can see here how easy it is to integrate, and you can find other components as well, like you have channel pickers, you have people pickers, so they all connect to Graph. And I will show you one of the most important component as well, which is MGT get. So you see here agenda gets your events, you have login, you have people. All these are targeted to specific things. So you get the people, you get a person, you get teams. But if you go to MGT get, what does it do? It actually gets anything that you put in the API. So MGT get, you provide the API call in here, and whatever this call brings back, you can template inside whatever you want to pass. So this is one of the hero components, I would say, because if you don't find anything in these components, you can go ahead and still use get and use your own components. So this is basically I hope I gave you a better understanding of Microsoft Graph Toolkit is. So it's like everything in one place, in one component, very powerful. You can use it in your vanilla JavaScript code, or in a React, or in Angular, or even in SharePoint projects, which I have done today using a React MGT. So yeah, that's Graph Toolkit. If there is anything else you would like to know, I'm happy to answer that for this toolkit.
Okay. I had a chance to work on Microsoft Graph API for one of
That's
the
great.
Teams integrations. So
Yeah.
what's the difference between Graph Toolkit and Graph API?
Good question. So Graph is the that one unified API that you would use to query or get information from Microsoft 365, right? That is just that is the API, that is the data set where you would retrieve your information that you need from. And Graph Toolkit uses that API, but it wraps it around components, so it is easily presentable and usable in your application. So it's in the back end, it's calling Graph. And in the front end, it has its own templates and beautiful looking UI. So it's a combination of of your UI UX experience and your Graph API in the hood.
Okay, so how about the SharePoint framework?
Right. So all valid questions, because we're here discussing about me experience, and me experience is an SPFx web part, and a SharePoint framework is actually if you maybe I'll take you back through in history before we moved to the cloud. We had SharePoint. We used to develop applications in .NET and form solutions in .NET, and we used to deploy it into the server. All that have changed now, and we have gone to cloud. So SharePoint basically, there is still on premise, but most of us are now in the cloud, and we have modern SharePoint. And the only way you can create web parts or extend your SharePoint is using SharePoint framework. So this is basically the developer toolkit that will provide you a way in which you can create modern applications for SharePoint. And the reason why I chose this SharePoint framework for me experience is how easy it is for me to take care of the hosting. So SharePoint framework not only provides you option to create applications or components for SharePoint, but also for Teams. So this tab that I've created here, the Me Experience, it's a SharePoint framework web part, but it is also an application in Teams. But I have not touched Azure. Like I have not gone and created my services there, or I've not deployed the application. For example, I don't have to worry about the back end of my application. It's inside SharePoint. So hosting is taken care of SharePoint, and I can readily access anything that is Microsofty, like the lists, the files, or if I want to connect with Graph, it is much easier when I do it with SharePoint framework. If you're going to be take your say, for example, your single page application hosted in Azure or somewhere, any other cloud, cloud, if you want to connect with Graph, or if you want to connect with any of the Microsoft ecosystem, then you have to take care of authentication. So that part is also now taken care of for me by SharePoint, because in SharePoint framework, it takes care of all these context automatically. And it is also mobile first. That's why all the modern pages rely on SharePoint frameworks. So I hope you got a better understanding. And I still have this slide here because I think it's like probably like a mic drop kind of a thing, where I just say, hey, these are the benefits of using SharePoint framework for your Teams application. Now tell me if there is anything that can match up to this. Basically, no need to host anywhere. You can reuse the code both in SharePoint and in Teams. And you have authentication built on, like you don't have to worry about it. And you also get other benefits like access to these endpoints, like I said. And we have an awesome community in SharePoint as well. So we try and get samples out. Even now we are creating samples in if you go to aka.ms /teams-samples, you can see all the PNP samples we're building on top of Teams and SharePoint. So yeah, why not SPFx?
Okay, so the main title is me experience today.
Yeah.
So the only me I know is the Windows me. So what does me experience mean? What does me stand for?
Yep. Yeah, so that's great, because this brings back to me to the article that my colleague. So if you know Waldeck, if you are in the SharePoint community or for quite a long time, you know Waldeck Mastikash, who is my colleague. He wrote this article in Microsoft Teams to build a me experience. So it's basically my information. So every day I come to work, I'm in my Teams. I know in my Teams I have collaboration happening. I am talking about things in the channel with my team, but sometimes I do switch my context back and forth. Why? Because I'm sometimes going to my application, my Outlook, or sometimes I'm going to my to-do list to see what my what are the tasks that I'm doing today, or what are my emails. Sometimes I go to office.com to see what are the files that are trending around me, or the frequently accessed files. Now that's something that you're keep on context switching from one application to another. So he wrote this great article on how to keep everything in one place inside Teams. You can achieve this in different ways. So he has actually said different ways you can do this. You can probably have a dedicated SharePoint page that would have my upcoming meetings, my tasks, on all this information. You could also create a Teams application for this. So this is a concept, right? So we since we worked together, we caught up and we thought, hey, why not we build this and put a sample out? So that's when this idea came out. And since this is about me, I thought, I mean, he probably came up with the name, so I cannot take credit for that. But this is the me experience. This is me, my information, and what I need to do to make my life easier every day. I can see all my events happening for the next coming days. I don't have to go to the calendar and find the event and click on the join link. I already have the join link here. I can see like a nice timeline if it's a Teams meeting. I know it's a dot for Teams meeting. If it's something else, then I just have meeting. I can see all my tasks that's pending. So now this is easier for me to track, and I can see every day probably I'm opening up a common document that I'm working on or collaborating on. I don't have to keep searching for it or go to office.com. I can just see it all here. So this basically, and every thing that you want to know or work on is right here. That's why it's me, my insights, my documents that are trending around me, and my settings. So settings is also something we added. For now, you only have one settings, but in future you can have, like, if you understand how one thing works, you can probably add another 10 different settings that you want to add, right? So you can also set this, like, I want my events for the next 7 days or 10 days or 20 days. If you're a busy person, I only want to see the next 3 days events. I don't want to see everything. You can do all that. So that's why it's a me experience. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as a developer, I always curious about extensions. So, I
Mhm.
want to ask you about the Microsoft Graph Open Extensions.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, we have settings here. And before I talk about open extensions, I will tell you how we came to a decision to use open extensions, like you're asking me now, and why we want the settings, right? So, why would you need an extra web part or an extra functionality to store settings? So, let me go back to my PowerPoint here and just give you a bit of a brief. So when you have Teams applications, when you build Teams applications, there are two types of tabs that you can create in Teams. So one is tabs in your team. So you need to have a team, you need to have channels there, and then you can see on top, you can see a tab that probably brings out information about your team, about something, that your it's a project information or something your team can understand or collaborate on. So like you see here, this is one of the stats or something, and then people can actually go in and chat in these teams context. They can be in the teams tab and still open up conversations, post information, all these kind of things. So this is one type of tab that you can create in Teams applications. Another one is a personal app. So the one we are discussing today is a personal app, and this is basically just for your view. So if I'm having this inside a team, it does not make any sense, because every person who is going to come into that tab is going to see his information. There's no collaboration happening there, because what I see may be different from what you see inside the team. So for that, you have personal apps. Personal apps don't live inside any team. They live outside. They're like, outside, probably on your left navigation, you can click and see the information. Again, it takes up all the real estate of your teams, but still, it's just your information. Now, the downside of these personal apps is, if you go here, these guys, they have settings. So if you click on these tabs, you can find any. If you're creating a SPFx web part for these Teams tabs, you will find configuration within the Teams tabs. But if for personal apps, they don't have that option. So that's one downside of personal apps. So for that, we need to provide a way in which users can do their settings. And to do their settings, there are different ways to do it, Mert, but I chose open extensions because I thought it made more sense, because it's graph. It's also if you have developed applications in the past, you might have used SharePoint user profile custom properties. So for a user, if you want to store some custom information, you would create a user profile property. Similar to that, for graph, you can create custom properties using open extensions. And open extensions can work in different resources. Like you can create an open extension. They're basically like, think about it like key value pair, where you can store some extra information other than what graph provides you out of the box. So you can have it either in devices, or you can have for groups, you can have for user. And I've used the user ones because I need to store some user information. And for this person, I'm storing some personal app settings inside users context. So if I go back to, probably I'll just take you through this one just to show you the different resources that uses these open extensions. So basically, it's just storing metadata for each resources. So that's the reason why I chose this. You can also use other techniques, like maybe you can create a list where you can store some value, but again, it's per user. So it makes sense to use to store it somewhere in graph or something, because you don't want to create the list every time you are adding these apps, or to manage the list, it might get bigger, etc. So yeah, that's the reason why we chose open extension, and this is what it does. This is the use for it. And just to be a bit more clear on this, I have the Graph Explorer here, which basically brings out all the extensions that I have. So if you just type me extensions, it will bring out all the extensions I have created. In our case, I have a me settings one. So I've created one called me settings. And I only have this one object here that is settings, and agenda days as 8. So I'm storing this. Now you can go ahead and increase the settings to have maybe other n number of things inside it as settings. I only have this one now, which is what you see in the settings. But if you want to increase that and add more information, you can do that. So it's my information. I have my profile information. At the same time, I also have my extra properties. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, great. So you talk about React components and other front-end frameworks.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about the other front-end technologies, which ones
Yeah.
are
So
supported?
Yeah, so basically, I would say all the Graph Toolkit components are agnostic. Like I said, it does not matter. You can even use it in React. Like if you have a React component, you can directly use these MGT ones that I showed you in the playground. You could use it. But just to keep it a bit more easier for people in React, because of the popularity of React, we have the React one, which actually wraps these. It is actually using these components itself, but it wraps around a React, sort of a templating, so that it's easier for people to put it in the React app. But you could go ahead and use this in Angular or any even plain HTML JavaScript file. You could go ahead and use this. So it doesn't matter really, to be honest. Like you could use this one also in React, but just to make it a bit more easier to onboard people more from React environment developers, we have the React components.
Okay, so we have talked about front-end, but I'm a backend developer, so I want to ask you about the backend. Which languages are supported?
So Graph, so the backend is Graph. So this is only the front end that you see. The backend is basically what you pass as a query, and that's Graph. And Graph is pretty agnostic itself. Like it even supports various languages. Even if you go to a Graph documentation, you can see they have provided samples for C, Objective C, for Java, for all. So it's like even Ruby, Python, everywhere you can start using Graph, right? So it doesn't matter. The backend is not really a worry for me as a developer, because I know it's being taken care of by the Graph Toolkit, and all I have to do is add these components in and pass my query. So what happens in the backend does not really bother me. But since you asked the question, I would say which is relevant, because you'll have all these kind of questions happening in your head. Since it's Graph API, it supports almost all the languages.
So basically, it supports REST calls. So
Sorry,
any
what was that?
languages, it basically support REST calls. So any languages support calling REST. It supports Graph Toolkit and Graph API.
Yeah,
Am I correct?
exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's correct. So it works.
Okay, great. So we are talking about Microsoft Teams so far,
Yeah.
and I wonder if Graph Toolkit and SharePoint framework, can I use it for other M365 products or other Microsoft products?
Okay. Yeah, for I can probably pick and point each one of them. So SPFx is basically you can use it in Teams and in SharePoint. So if you want to develop applications for SharePoint, you can use it in SPFx. So these are the only two areas where you could use SPFx. And for Graph Toolkit, I can proudly say that it can be used anywhere. So even if it's your application is a single page application, you can start using it there. Even if it's just a HTML file you're doing, I mean, you're having hosted somewhere, you could use Graph Toolkit. So Graph Toolkit can be used anywhere, as long as it's a web-based application.
Okay, great. Do you have any? Do you want to add anything before we have finished? So
Yeah. What else did I have in mind to talk about? I did speak about Graph and Graph Toolkit, and I wanted to really showcase a bit on what a Teams application is, just to make you understand about the differences when you do it in SharePoint framework and when you do it when you're hosting it online somewhere in a cloud. So apps for Teams basically means whatever backend you have, you will have this Teams app, which is a zip file, which contains the Teams manifest file and the icons. And all you have to do is upload this zip file into your Teams. Now, I will take you through the manifest file as well, just to give you a basic understanding. And if you are developing applications, like if you already have web experience hosted somewhere, then all you need is this Teams app.zip file, which consists of maybe the configuration, the URL, everything going back to your website or Azure site, or wherever it is hosted. But when you're creating applications for SharePoint framework, there will be two packages. So one is the one you, same way, the one you upload in Teams, and the other one is the SPPKG package, which is basically your SharePoint framework solution that you have to upload into your app catalog. So these are the two different things that you have to keep in mind when we say apps for Microsoft Teams in SharePoint framework. This is what it means. So basically, your backend, whatever CI/CD pipeline or any other operation that you do, update or anything that's happening to your application, is done in the app catalog, and your Teams apps basically is just something that holds everything together, like an interface that will show information in your Teams application. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And what I will do is, to be a bit more clear on that aspect, I will take you to the manifest file that I have in the solution. So if that's okay. So this is basically the solution that I've created for the Me application. It's an SPFx solution that you can scaffold out using Yeoman generator. So if you come here, you can see that this entire solution, we have three web parts. Here, I will just unhide these things. And in these web parts, you can see insights, planning, and settings. So what I've done here is I've created three web parts, SPFX web parts, for each of the tabs that we have in the Me experience, and basically tied these web parts into the manifest file. So as a developer, all you need to have uploaded into your Teams is the manifest file and the two icon files, which basically is just the icons that you see in your applications in Teams. This file would have all the information of the application. Plus, if you see here, the static tabs are basically the personal app space for your application. And you can see here, I have just added all the three web parts that I created as tabs. So this remains the same. All this URL remains the same, except for the component ID, which is a GUI ID that you get from your application, which is inside the application's manifest file. So if you see here, this probably is the component ID for each web part. And another interesting thing is, to make each of your SharePoint web part a Teams application, you need to make it visible in your Teams. And to do that, you have something called supported host, which is inside the manifest of each of the SPFX web part. And I have added Teams personal app. So when you actually first scaffold this web part out, the only supported host it will have is the SharePoint web part. Now, once you decide I want to make a Teams tab out of these web part, I can go ahead and add Teams personal app or Teams tab. If you want to create a Teams tab, you can do that as well. For my experience, I don't need it to be a Teams app, so I just chose the Teams personal app. So these are the changes that you usually make in order to make your SPFX web part visible in Teams. Another interesting aspect is, like I said before, we have something called providers in Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And here I'm using SharePoint providers, but you can have other providers as well in your SharePoint, Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Like you have MCell provider, you have custom provider, you have Teams provider. So based on what your application is, your providers also differ, which actually takes care of the authentication side of things. If it was MCell, you would have configured your authentication in an Azure app registration and then pass the client ID information here. For me, this is super simple because SharePoint authentication is the simplest. I have just written this single line of code which takes care of my authentication altogether. So that's the only thing you need to do. And then after which you can go ahead and add your components in. So here I'm using the get component of Microsoft Graph Toolkit and just passing the API information. And you can see here I've used a custom template, which files is actually a custom template, a React component that I created. But in future, this is going to be replaced by a ready-made Microsoft Graph Toolkit component called MGT files. So it's coming. I know the issue's already been created and people are have started to work on it. So this is how you add the components from MGT React. You basically get the component and just add it into your files. Now, I just wanted to show this because, these are probably the things that you might want to know when you first deep dive into this. But there are heaps of blogs that can also help you in these kind of things. If you've got any questions around this, please let me know. But this basically is how we add the Graph Toolkit into SPFx and make each SPFx web part a tab inside a Teams application.
So, is there any VS Code extension for speed our development?
There is no extension for SPFx, but you can go ahead. Actually, it's using Yeoman generator. So if you go and install Yeoman in your environment and then install the generator for SharePoint, you can start creating a fresh project, which will basically create one web part and this entire structure for you, including the Teams folder.
Okay, great.
But that's a good point. I should take this back to the product team about the extension. Thanks for that.
Got it.
So this is the feedback we like. Yep. So other than that, I think we covered most of the concept around this, unless you have any other questions. I also recorded this just in case, just if you are just focusing on PowerPoint. But yeah, it's all. That's all I wanted to discuss here. And here's my blog, which I have created. This is probably where it all started. Created the blog where I've mentioned all that we discussed here around each of the web part that I created for it, and how I created the basic tips, and also the theming. Because if you go to this application, you can see here. It will respect the themes for each of the, whatever theme you choose, whether it's dark, whether it's high contrast, it just respects all that as well, which basically is another part of code that you will see here in the application, which depends. Sorry, my dog is barking, but which depends on this. So if you are inside the Teams context, this will have all the information that you need. This context will have all the information you need regarding your Teams application. And then you can apply the theme based on it. So all this information is inside my blog, because I've put that in the GitHub repo, either in my GitHub repo, also it's also in the PNP Teams samples. So I'll just click through that and show you all the different samples available. These are all Teams applications, either using SPFx or not using SPFx. You can go ahead and see here. So different samples This is built by the community, and my sample is also there. I think somewhere here. SPFx, where is it? Can you find it? Oh yeah, the me experience. Here it is. So that's the. This is where you can find all the source for it.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for this great presentation.
No worries. My pleasure.
Thank you. I learned too much. I hope everyone watching us learned about this stuff. So thank you very much again, and hope to see you again in a different episode soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. So see you later.
See ya.
Bye. Cheers.
Bye.